become 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
We are coming to you live from Boston, Massachusetts on Revolution Radio. If you'd like to tune in to hear us, go to free conference call. Dial in 515-604-9715. Enter the access code 708922. You see, simply because it's a necessity, as there are no call-in numbers posted. You can ask a question or get involved at 347-905-5581. That number works. Good evening. My name is Frank Allen with the Allen Institute for Human Rights and Targeted Massachusetts. Tonight, I report on U.S. electromagnetic weapons and human rights, and a review of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. To receive our newsletter, please go to targetedmassachusetts.org. You will see a drop-down menu. There, you can insert your email address, hit submit, then you will automatically receive the newsletter. Okay, so far as a guest, we have Richard from North Carolina. How you doing tonight, Richard?
I'm doing okay, Frank. I do hope you other guys are, and thank you for the topics tonight. And human rights is one of our biggest issues all across the nation, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that the term intellectual property is going to be redefined this year on this show. So let me start out with U.S. electromagnetic weapons and human rights. Now, credit in full or in part goes to Peter Phillips, Lou Brown, and Bridget Thornton. As a study of the history of United States intelligence community, human rights violations, and continuing research in electromagnetic weapons, completed December 2006. Declaration of Human Rights .docs. I can make that available for you. This research explores the current capabilities of the United States military to use electromagnetic or EMF devices to harass, intimidate, and kill individuals, and the continuing possibilities of violations of human rights by the testing and development of these weapons. To establish historical precedent in the U.S. for such acts, we document long-term human rights and freedom of thought violations by U.S. military intelligence organizations. Additionally, we explore contemporary evidence of ongoing government research in EMF weapons, the technologies, and the examination of the potentialities of continuing human rights abuses. Now, if you're going to tell a story, it's good to start at the beginning. So we're going to start in the 1950s, when the CIA created Project MK Ultra And those of you who doubt its existence, I have the original government document from 1953 that started the first money allocation and initiated Project MKUltra. In the 1950s and 60s, the CIA began work to find means for influencing human cognition, emotion, and behavior through the use of the psychological understanding of the human being as a social animal and the ability to manipulate a subject's environment through isolation, drugs, and hypnosis. U.S.-funded scientists have long searched for better means of controlling human behavior. This research has included the use of wireless-directed electromagnetic energy under the heading of information warfare and non-lethal weapons. Non-lethal weapons. When people die, people are maimed, or worse. It's not a non-lethal weapon. New technological capabilities have been developed in black budget projects over the last few decades, including the ability to influence human emotion, disrupt thought, and present excruciating pain through the manipulation of magnetic fields. The U.S. military and intelligence agencies have at their disposal frightful new weapons. Weapons that have already been covertly used and or tested on humans unbeknownst to them, both here and abroad, which could be directed against the public in the event of mass protests or civil disturbance. Human rights belong to people collectively. To believe in rights for some and not others is a denial to humanity worldwide. Yet denial is exactly what Congress and George W. Bush did with the signing of the Military Commission Act of 2006. The new official U.S. policy is that torture and suspension of due process are acceptable for anyone the President deems to be a terrorist or supporter. This act is the overt denial of the inalienable rights of human beings, propagated in our Declaration of Independence and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, put forth by the United Nations. More so, U.S. actions declared to the world that the U.S. suspends human rights for those it believes are evil. The United States believes that Julian Assange is not a journalist. He is a criminal. He was reporting the truth to the American people and to the world. He sought asylum in Ecuador, or at least in their embassy, in the UK. Ecuador violated every rule that they signed on to the United Nations. Still, the United Nations did nothing. They did nothing. They did not step in and stop it. Edward Snowden sought asylum in Russia. Vladimir Putin personally saw to his asylum. He lives there today in fear that if he goes to the U.S., he will be prosecuted and put in jail, just as they hope to do with Julian Assange. What did he do? He reported wrongdoings of the United States of America, who claims that there is no torture in the U.S., there is no trafficking in the U.S., there is no child rings or pornography in the United States. The United States, I guess, must be perfect. The precious words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This did not declare that only some men and women possess unalienable rights. Our independence was founded on the understanding that all men and women are recognized by this nation as having innate rights derived by their humanity. Likewise, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, created by the United Nations in 1948, signed and ratified by the U.S. Congress, specifies in its preamble that recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family or species is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So, does the preamble of a document is it treated the same way as the rest of the document? Well, guess what? If you sign this document, you've signed the preamble, and you are responsible. What we are trying to declare here is that the United States has been responsible to the United Nations for years. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been a guide for international law for most of 6 decades, and as such binds the United States to its general principles. Article 10 states that everyone is entitled to full equality, to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal, and the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him. And Article 5 specifically prohibits torture or cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. Both of these basic human rights have been superseded by the passage of the Military Commissions Act of 2006. Additionally, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights declares that everyone has the right to freedom of thought and freedom of expression and opinion. This means that humans have the inalienable right to be able to freely think their own thoughts and discover their own truths. This paper addresses this most fundamental human right and explores the pending threats to individual freedom of thought posed by new EMF weapons technologies. Freedom of thought, or cognitive liberty, is the natural human right of each person to be secure in their ability to perceive the world to the best of their ability, to have true cognitive liberty in a world as complex as ours would mean that first, we must have access to truthful and unbiased information about the actions of others and the general state of the world. The Center for Cognitive Liberties defines this as the right of each individual to think independently and autonomously, to use the full spectrum of his or her mind, and to engage in multiple modes of thought without accurate representations. We cannot make independently informed choices. It is imperative that the human body and mind be considered sacred, a sanctuary. To invade a person's body without their consent is an egregious human rights crime. If somebody is raped, this is an invasion as presented. If your mind is invaded by an electromagnetic weapon, people will not talk to you. Nobody wants to hear about it. Nobody wants to hear that the United States has not just begun, they have been building China's mind control training centers. Who? The Massachusetts Institute for Technology, for one. There are others, but I choose not to mention them. The circumstance may soon arrive in which anti-war or anti-human rights protesters suddenly feel a burning sensation akin to touching a hot skillet over their entire body. Simultaneously, they may hear terrifying, nauseating screaming, which, while not produced externally, fills their brains with overwhelming disruption. Not only are both phenomena currently possible, but designs for more powerful EMF technologies receive continuous funding from the United States government. We are in a time of extremism. We are in a time of permanent war and the unilateral manifestation of ethnocentrism and power by a cabal of people in the United States government. These power elites have been in operation for decades and are set on nothing less than the total U.S. military domination of the world. They defy the fundamental, foundational values of the American people to achieve their ends. This is not a new phenomenon. The repression of human rights has been present within the U.S. government throughout our history. I will give you an example. Everyone has always got up at 5 or 6 in the morning and gone to work, confident that they were working for their family, to have a home, to have an automobile. And they put the United States government out of their mind. This is by design. The United States government wants you working. They want you going to football games. They want you sitting in front of that television, watching the football games. They want you distracted and kept busy so that they can weave their webs of contempt for humanity. 500,000 Americans have been experimented on. This is a fact coming from Eldon Bird, a very knowledgeable scientist, a comical individual with life ahead of him. Unfortunately, he has passed away. But what he leaves behind is a legacy. He brought things forward that no one else has at that particular time, which was right before 9/11. So while everyone has been busy, the elite, who don't have to work, don't have to do anything, have been busy. They've been very busy. We have a coronavirus that we don't understand. Many have to wear masks that we don't understand. Many are kept from school and are being homeschooled. This is a terrible occurrence that will affect the United States for 20 to 30 years to come. A long thread of sociological research documents the existence of a dominant ruling class in the U.S. that sets policy and determines national political priorities. The American ruling class is complex and intercompetitive. Maintaining itself through interacting families of high social standing with similar lifestyles, corporate affiliations and memberships in elite social clubs and private schools. This American ruling class is self-perpetuating, maintaining its influence through policymaking institutions such as the National Manufacturing Association, the National Chamber of Commerce, Business Council, Business Roundtable, Conference Board, American Enterprise Institute, and here's one that we will go into at a later date in detail, and that's the Council on Foreign Relations. And there are other businesses, centered policy groups. C. Wright Mills, in his 1956 book, The Power Elite, documents how World War II solidified a trinity of power in the United States, comprised of corporate, military, and government. These elites, in a centralized power structure motivated by class interests and working in unison through higher circles of contact and agreement. Mills described how the power elite were those who decide whatever is decided of major consequence. With the advent of the military-industrial complex after World War II, President Eisenhower observed that an internal military-industrial power faction was consolidating their long-term plans for the domination of America and eventually the world. Eisenhower was in no position to fight these men, and history records his feelings on this subject with the text of his short farewell address. And I quote, "But threats, new in kind or degree, constantly arise. Of these, I mention two only. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience." You have to remember that way back in the 50s, when they were pulling all these experiments, we had a very naive population. We had guys that just couldn't wait to go to work, and women that were at home at that time, and they couldn't wait for their husbands to come home so they could go out to the drive-in, and they had great lives. In the 40s, after the war, the men came home. Everyone had great lives. And all the time, the United States government was pulling this BS on this innocent population. And today, we have very much the same thing happening. Everybody is looking at their smartphone, their computer, their tablet, or their television. So what's happening? We have a society of device people. Generation Z. All they care about is looking at their smartphones. The device generation. If they don't get a hold of what's going on, we're going down. The State House, every office of the federal government, we recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together, akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture. This has been the technological revolution during recent decades. In this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. We must now understand that Eisenhower was referring to the conjunction of redirected tax monies to research secret, dark projects and new technology aimed at nothing less than increasing the controlling power of the military-industrial elite to a global scale. Tragic, but true. One particular faction of ambitious men, the former Cold Warriors and emerging neoconservatives, were close followers of philosopher Leo Strauss. This elite group included not just generals and industrialists, but philosophers, scientists, academics, politicians. They all have now become the most powerful public-private war organization ever known to mankind. Strauss exposed an elite philosophy that fawned over the characteristics of those who inherited wealth and lived lives of leisure to pursue whatever their interests may be. His ideas have been transformed into a cogent ideology in which the media, religion, and government are used to subdue the masses, while the real nobles follow their own will without regard to the laws designed to control lesser men? Lesser men. That's what they referred to us as, lesser men. Strauss was fond of secrecy as a necessity for control, because if the lesser men found out what was being done to them, they would no doubt be upset. And the lesser women would be right behind them. What has happened as the town hall government of George Washington became a government that when an individual goes to see his representative in Congress, he has a policeman waiting at his door when he gets home. So what's happened? The government thinks that we have no power. The government thinks that we are no one. The government thinks that they can wipe their feet on our backsides. We, the people, are the United States of America. The government works for us. The people will not be happy to learn that there is only one natural right. The right of the superior to rule over the inferior, the master over the slave, the husband over the wife, and the wise few over the vulgar many. In On Tyranny, Strauss refers to this natural right as the tyrannical teaching of his beloved ancients. Leo Strauss, Albert Wolfsletter, and others at the University of Chicago's Committee on Social Thought received wide credit for promoting the neoconservative agenda through their students. Paul Wolfowitz, Alan Bloom, and Bloom's student Richard Pearl. Canadian Cultural Review magazine, Adbusters, defines neoconservatism as the belief that democracy, however flawed, was best defended by an ignorant public pumped on naturalism, nationalism, and religion. Only a militantly nationalist state could deter human aggression. Such nationalism requires an external threat, and if one cannot be found, it must be created. I think we've seen that. The neoconservative philosophy emerged as a reaction to the 1960s era of social revolutions. Numerous officials, associates in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush presidencies were strongly influenced by the neoconservative philosophy, including John Ashcroft, Charles Fairbanks, Richard Cheney, Kenneth Edelman, Elliott Abrams, William Crystal, and Douglas Feith. Within the Ford administration, there was a split between Cold War and Cold War traditionalists seeking to minimize confrontations through diplomacy and détente, and neoconservatives advocating stronger and yet stronger confrontations with the Soviets, the evil empire. Well, the evil empire was created by the United States. They were to trump up all of the activity that was happening in the Soviet Union. They made the Soviets evil empire. Propaganda, a word that you thought only came from Nazi Germany and Tokyo Rose from Japan. The latter group became more entrenched when George H.W. Bush became CIA director. Bush allowed the formation of Team B, headed by Richard Pipes, along with Paul Wolfitz, Louis Libby, Paul Neitz, and others who formed the Second Committee on the Present Danger to raise awareness of the Soviet threat and the continuing need for a strong, aggressive defense policy. Their efforts led to a strong anti-Soviet positioning during the Reagan administration. The Committees on the Present Danger, or CPD, extend from the 50s Russian threat to the present. The current CPD proudly boasts on their website, in times of great challenge to the security of the United States, Republicans, Democrats, and independents have traditionally joined to make an assertive defense of American interests. Twice before in American history, the Committee on Present Danger has risen to this challenge. It emerged in 1950 as a bipartisan education and advocacy organization dedicated to building a national consensus for a strong defense against Soviet expansion. In 1976, the Committee on the Present Danger reemerged with leadership from the labor movement, bipartisan representatives of the foreign policy community, and academia, all of whom were concerned about strategic drift in U.S. security policy. With victory in the Cold War, the mission of the Committee on the Present Danger was considered complete and consequently was deactivated. Today, the current CPD promotes radical Islamists as the primary threat to the American people, and millions of others who prize liberty. They claim that the threat is global. They also claim that they operate from cells in a number of countries. Rogue regimes seek power by making common cause with terrorist groups. The prospect that is deadly collusion may include weapons of mass destruction and murder. This was the justification for the invasion of Iraq. Journalist John Pilger recalls his interview with neoconservative Richard Pearl. This is during the Reagan administration, and I quote, "I interviewed Pearl when he was advising Reagan, and when he spoke about total war, I mistakenly dismissed him as mad. He recently used the team again in describing America's war on terror. No stages. This is total war. We are fighting a variety of enemies. There are lots of them out there. All this talk about first we are going to do Afghanistan, then we will do Iraq. This is entirely the wrong way to go about it. If we must let our vision of the world go forth, and we embrace it entirely, and we don't try to piece it together, clever diplomacy, but just wage a total war, our children will sing great songs about us years from now. The songs they will sing are what were they thinking? They were destroying the planet. They exploded nuclear weapons underground, poisoning land for thousands of years. They dropped bombs on Japan, and they say they saved 50,000 lives. Well, we lost those 50,000 lives in Vietnam. There is ample evidence available to show that some individuals within government and industry have little problem with violating the public trust and using their positions to kill, maim, torture, and destroy. It is of the utmost importance to our traditional American values of human rights and cognitive liberty that we recognize this threat from within. We must move to identify those who show these proclivities and ensure that their activities have adequate oversight. Stanley Milgram's famous experiment involving obedience to authority proved that individuals are easily cowed into submitting to anyone who has a claim of authority, and that on average 61% of people will administer pain to another. They will administer pain to another human being if instructed to do so by a higher authority. But there's a higher authority, much higher than that does not approve. Both test groups in these experiments rationalized their behavior by appealing to the greater good, because it was for the advancement of science. They were able to be convinced they should ignore personal judgment and obey the instructions given to them by the experimenters. Who are they to say anything? Martin Orne, who was one of those paid by the CIA to conduct experiments on obedience, showed in 1962 that people would go to tremendous lengths to please a person of authority. Orne conducted research that involved presenting subjects with a stack of 2,000 pages of random numbers and instructing them to add each two adjacent numbers until he returned. Over 90% of the test subjects continued in this meaningless task for up to 5 hours. Today, the combination of political climate and technological capability presents a condition in which widespread manipulation of not only the flow of information through the media, but also the manipulation of the emotional states and cognitive ability in large populations could be achieved. Why do we have a media that is not bipartisan? We have a media that has chosen to side with one party and one party only for the last 4 years. We have a media that takes orders from authority. We have a media that prints lies. We have a media, relatively, that will not print the truth. So what do? I'll tell you what we do. We follow the Constitution. See your representatives. Go there in groups. Make your demands known. If you have to take a week off from work to support your little white house and the picket fence that you could lose any day because you're behind. The elites aren't behind. They're caught up on everything. If policy elites are unaccountable to the public for their actions, and the public has become emotionally manipulated to support them, we can assume that they will certainly abuse their positions in the pursuit of their own agendas. Previous human rights and cognitive liberty violations are evidenced in CIA and FBI records pertaining to the infamous MKUltra project and the grim record of harassment and subversion uncovered in the COINTELPRO program, forced through the 1950s into the 1970s. We also examine some of the cases of illegal experimentation on the public dating back to the 1930s. We consider in depth the forms of electromagnetic weapons entering the battlefield today that trace their origins back through the secret projects of the Defense Department in the 1950s.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Be evasive, but that doesn't mean that they're telling the truth as opposed to fiction.
In Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, and there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came and also the daughters of men, indicating that there were giants before the Nephilim.
And sons of God, plural. They weren't talking about Jesus coming down.
No, that's right. Yeah.
I'm Steve Crawford, host of Factor Theory Live. Join me every Sunday night from 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern Standard Time on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Check it out.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Galactic Interstellar Council on Revolution Radio Studio A, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us as we traverse the starseed paradigm, as expressed in the time-space continuum that we know as the divine expression of love and light. Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and bomb us. Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us.
Good evening.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio, 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 radio. All
right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
Good evening, and welcome to the Allen Institute. We explore human rights and human rights violations. We explore whatever is going wrong. And I am not afraid to speak my mind. I am not afraid to uncover all the lies. I'm not afraid to dive in the swamp and drag up all of their wicked little secrets. Like our past president, I want to drain that swamp so everyone can see it. To get back to our topic tonight, the United States government and their wicked proliferation of bioelectronic weaponry, cyber weaponry, invoking cyber torture on individuals, psychological warfare, information war, and mind control may seem to be exotic, very exotic topics, but the impact of these technologies and techniques is profound. Our minds are being impacted through a long-standing series of programs aimed at manipulating public opinion through intelligence agencies, think tanks, corporate media, and a host of non-governmental organizations designed to endanger and engender. They want fear, division, and uncertainty in the public. Media manipulation involving the artificial framing of our collective reality is often a hit or miss proposition. But psychological operations have been carried out in the past and are being carried out even today through the practices of information warfare directed at enemies abroad and at the American people. We, the people, don't deserve this. We have been working all of our lives only to see immigrants coming into this country by the thousands now. And they are getting your Social Security. The wall has been stopped. The wall between Mexico and the United States, building of which stopped. Ridiculous. According to Mary C. Fitzgerald of the Hudson Institute, new concept weapons such as laser, electromagnetic, plasma, climatic, genetic, and biotechnological are the central principle driving the modernization of national defense. The potential for these weapons to be used for both good and bad deserves a great deal of attention. But there is little to be found in the media or discussed by our administration. The U.S. is a system of many institutions, including those whose sole function is to provide government oversight. When problems arise that threaten the stability of the country or the safety of the people, the U.S. government is designed to have checks and balances that allow the people to challenge misconduct, either directly or through congressional representatives. Increasingly, oversight is disintegrating. According to a 2006 report in the Boston Globe, the Intelligence Committee does not read most intelligence reports in their entirety. The media is complicit in omitting information necessary to make democratic decisions. A global dominance agenda includes penetration into the boardrooms of the corporate media in the U.S. A research team at Sonoma State University recently finished conducting a network analysis of the boards of directors of the 10 big media giants in the U.S. The team determined that only 118 people comprise the membership on the boards of directors of the 10 big media giants. These 118 individuals, in turn, sit on the corporate boards of 288 national and international corporations. 4 of the top 10 media corporations in the U.S. have DoD contractors on the board of directors. I am not going to list the numbers or the names, but if anybody wants them, just write me at frank@aihr.foundation. I repeat, frank@aihr.foundation.
You know, it's unfortunate, but it is.
Given an interlocked media network, big media in the U.S. effectively represent corporate America's interests. The media elite, a key component of policy elites in the U.S., are the watchdogs of acceptable ideology. The controllers of news and information content, and the decision makers regarding media resources. It is not suggested that everyone in the government believes in global domination, nor that it is the intent of every government official to cover up misconduct. Scientists involved in potentially harmful technology are not mad scientists. But in fact, there are many reports in the public sphere addressing government and military misconduct that are put forth by people within these very institutions. The problem is the government threatens whistleblowers, intimidates officials with job loss, infiltrates activist organizations, and increases surveillance. We have a psychological war here.
240,000 emergency production 2020 American
Modern psychological operations, or PSYOPs, were significantly advanced in the Second World War.
Less than 1,500 of these extraordinary silver dollar coins remain. Hurry.
They were brought to bear on the American public during the 1950s
American Eagle silver dollar coins.
with the formation of a widespread network of social scientists, journalists, politicians, military specialists, and intelligence operatives. PSYOPs were used to promote a variety of programs in cooperation with the industrial military complex. Their key piece of information warfare was the communist Red Menace. One of the opening salvos in this war of deception was fired by George Kennan, the American ambassador to Moscow, describing the Soviet threat in a long cable sent to Washington in 1946. Kennan spent decades studying the Russian political scene. He became convinced that there would be little chance of cooperation with the Soviets and recommended several actions, most notably the institution of political war through the newly formed CIA, a decision he later regretted, even arguing for the elimination of the CIA in 1997. In the late 1950s, a right-wing cadre of men within the new CIA was busy building secret armies, planning assassinations, and generally devising plans for world domination that still play out today.
Can I just ask something that
Operation Gladio was one example, well documented and international in scope, in which right-wing members of the U.S. intelligence community created stay-behind armies in many of the nations of Europe. Those armies managed to infiltrate the highest levels of politics, most notably in Italy, where the term gladio refers to a double-edged sword, and have been held responsible for numerous false flag terrorist acts through the 1980s and 1990s. Terror and propaganda often go hand in hand in the extremist elements within our military and intelligence communities. To counter the divisions within the intelligence community, a greater voice was given to organizations, formal and informal, in the 1950s. One such group, the First Committee on the Present Danger, or CPD, which we actually went over earlier,
so for your state, you have, if you look at starting in July,
started a series of gap crises: the bomber gap, the missile gap, the space gap, and the brainwashing and psychotronic gap were used to justify increased military technology spending. Congress was led to believe that the Soviets were a much greater threat than they actually were, and that a terrifying new weapon was being developed that threatened America.
we have seen the virus.
They were thus convinced to vote for virtually any black budget, any proposal that came their way. The CPD ran a series of broadcasts to the public through the Mutual Broadcasting Network that spread fear in the minds of the public. Under the first civilian CIA director, Alan Welch Dulles, the company began to push forward with its agenda of manufacturing consent from the American people for a new state of perpetual war and industrialization. Dulles was a well-connected individual, a successful spy for the OSS in Switzerland during the war, related to 3 secretaries of state, and the chief advisor to Dewey when he ran for president in 1948. Dulles had access to the highest echelon of policy making, and his influence was global in scope, counting among his close friends Henry Lucy, publisher of Newsweek, relying heavily upon established circles of contacts within the nation's media elites. Dulles recruited key members of the media to work directly for the CIA under Operation Mockingbird. Mockingbird was a psychological information campaign against the American people, in a campaign that would lead to acceptance of blanket secrecy for national security. The Red Scare became the excuse for spending vast sums of money on weapon systems and an increase in covert operations, both in foreign countries and within the United States. In the 1950s and 1960s, movies, news articles, books, radio, and television programs were carefully laced with anti-communist messages, some of them subliminal, and images designed to produce an acceptance of the policies being promoted by the defense elite's propaganda machine. Propaganda is something that we never heard, or at least we didn't hear about it coming from our own government. Propaganda came from Red China. Propaganda came from Russia. Propaganda came from Germany. I never thought that propaganda came from the United States. One of the engineers of this deception was a former head of the Stay Behind Network, Edward W. Barrett, director of the Interdepartmental Psychological Strategy Board, or IPSB, and not coincidentally an editor at Newsweek. Barrett was seen as being very effective in his efforts to manipulate public opinion. At the same time, CPD was a non-political group, just citizens of the Western Coast. And they launched a media campaign in favor of the urgent reinforcement of the national defense. Among the organizers of the committee were Frank Altshuler, Director of Council for Foreign Relations, William Donovan, former head of the OSS during World War II, and General Dwight D. Eisenhower. All of this activity was more than enough to stoke the fears of the public and encourage policymakers to accept the Cold War, the view of the world. This allowed Truman to convince Congress to approve a tripled military budget that provided funding for secret research and development, and turn a blind eye in the name of national security to black ops, programs authorized under the new Cold War rubric of containment and aimed at undermining otherwise peaceful nations and fomenting war, torture, and assassination in countries as diverse as Iran, Guatemala, and Indochina. Post-war developments in Europe, especially the British withdrawal from Greece, led Truman to decide it was necessary to have a permanent American presence in the old.
Yes, I'm just wanting to listen to the show.
Okay, sir, that's not a problem at all. We have room for like 9 or 10 in there. It's usually for a guest, but if you couldn't get a guest seat, that's fine.
Do you want me to use the other number, the 515-604-9715?
You're fine where you are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So President Truman decided it was necessary to have a permanent American presence in the old continent to counteract the communist influence. General George C. Marshall, Secretary of State, designed a vast plan that mixed economic assistance and secret actions aimed at establishing democracies and making sure that voters in foreign countries made the right choice. Sir, you need to mute yourself.
How do I mute myself?
Yes, you're coming through here.
How do I mute myself? What do I hit?
Try *6, sir.
Okay.
Okay, just mute your phone from its own parameters.
I don't know how to mute my phone.
Okay, you're going to have to leave, sir, because it's disrupting the call.
Okay, not a problem.
Okay, thank you. National Security Council Directive NSC 10-2, written by Kennan, made official the creation of Anti-Communist Interference Network. The U.S. intelligence community had an ace in the hole, Reinhard Gehlen, a Nazi spy master with an existing network of agents, became the front man in Eastern Europe for American intelligence. General Reinhard Gehlen proved to be troublesome for the CIA. Communist counter-spies infiltrated his network. His information was often incorrect, and he had downplayed his eagerness to serve the Reich. But Galen was only one of thousands of Nazis recruited to assist in the new Cold War through Operation Paperclip. In fact, the intelligence assets acquired by bringing the Gestapo onto the U.S. public payroll was overshadowed by the acquisition of dozens of brilliant Nazi scientists and researchers. At this juncture, Truman, through the application of the 1947 National Security Act and the newly formed National Security Council, authorized a vast number of secret projects involving chemical, biological, nuclear, and electromagnetic experiments. Former Nazis were put in charge of many of the most sensitive programs and facilities. The Army Ballistic Missile Agency, ABMA, was entrusted to the former SSS officer Weinhard von Braun. Kurt Du Bois, another ex-SSS officer, directed Cape Canaveral. At this time, scientists began working on black projects in earnest, including attempts at finally developing the lost theories of Nikola Tesla, the Siberian-born American physicist, into military and intelligence applications. Military interest into the weaponization of the electromagnetic spectrum has a long history, based on the theoretical work of Nikola Tesla. Radar, in its early inception, was seen not only as a means of tracking the position and speed of enemy targets, but as a potential weapon in its own right. There are very real problems, however, with overcoming the normal decrease in effect of an electromagnetic field over distance. This effect is a natural function of the laws of physics and applies to both electrical and magnetic fields. In short, the strength of a field drops off in inverse proportion to the distance of the target from the source. Without a means of concentrating and directing a beam of energy across long distances, any effect that an EMF weapon may have would be limited to its immediate vicinity. From 1900 until his death in 1943, Nikola Tesla worked to develop just such a weapon. Tesla made several claims during the latter years of his life, published by the New York Times, in what became an annual event. His theory of the hidden nature of our universe supplements those of many of his contemporaries, in that he was able to infer a multidimensional model of the universe that is only now being investigated through the theoretical mathematics of our leading physicists. Tesla also developed means of remotely controlling aircraft as early as 1915, foreshadowing the unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, of today's battlefields. In 1934, Tesla offers to build a death ray that would make the power of an opponent's air force obsolete. This was one of the earliest recorded statements regarding directed energy weapons. Tesla's offer to build this device for the U.S. government for a bargain price, but with many caveats, was refused by officials who preferred instead to pump money into the new Army Air Corps, which in turn gave rise to the military aviation complex that we have today. Before the war, the airline industry was not a major part of the economic life of the nation. With a huge wartime contract, however, corporations such as Hughes, McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed, and Northrop quickly grew in power, commensurate with the financial bonanza that was unearthed in the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific. These companies formed the core of the military-industrial complex. Their investors and managers began to consolidate their clout in political circles to keep the nation on a wartime economic footing. A simple and vastly powerful weapon that would make aircraft, bombs, missiles, and attendant industries irrelevant would certainly be seen as a direct threat to the growing power of the military arsenal. Instead, a black budget program was put into motion, which exploited the work of Robert Oppenheimer, Albert Einstein, and others. The Manhattan Project, developed by DoD in 1942. This generated a vastly destructive weapon that required a well-established and unbelievably expensive aerospace industry, along with unprecedented levels of secrecy and autonomy from Congress and the public. The U.S. government also ignored Tesla's offer to produce a city-killing machine, which was composed of an electromagnetic shield and a wireless torpedo. Tesla made several proposals during the 1930s, none of which received funding. Tesla was published on his birthday in the New York Times. There were methods of harnessing the power of the sun to electrify the earth and provide free electrical power to anybody, anywhere. Tesla did, however, conceive of at least one device that became a major part of our nation's arsenal, and that is, as we mentioned, radar. As early as 1917, he published his theory and developed the first prototype in 1934. It is from the basis of this technology that future research into weaponizing the electromagnetic spectrum proceeded. At the same time, Tesla was working on methods of transmitting and receiving communication signals through interplanetary space and reading the images on a sleeping person's retina. By extension, this means mind reading. His prediction that future wars would be fought with electromagnetic means foreshadowed the rise of electronic warfare and the non-lethal weapons technology being deployed today. At a glance, it would seem probable that the military had taken over the management of Tesla's material. In fact, several projects related to his life's work were in development. For instance, the building of beam weapons at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base under the code name Project Nick, headed by Brigadier General L.C. Craigie. This project was, however, canceled due to an apparent lack of understanding of Tesla's means of transmitting high-energy waves without a loss of power over great distances. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, began another project in 1958, codenamed Seesaw, at Lawrence Livermore Labs, aimed at combating reported Soviet advances in electromagnetic weapons. These advances that many believe came about after 1952, when the bulk of Tesla's research and personal effects were turned over to his nephew, Sava Kosanovic, who promptly whisked them away to Yugoslavia. 8 years later, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev would state that a new and fantastic weapon is in the hatching stage, horrifying many and prompting calls for more effective means of using EMF. Espionage and counter-espionage were also engaged. On February 9, 1981, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense Research and Engineering Department sent a letter to the FBI that requested the papers of Tesla, stating, "We believe certain of Tesla's papers may contain basic principles which would be of considerable value to certain ongoing research within the DoD. It would be very helpful to have access to these papers." The letter was signed by Lieutenant Colonel Alan J. McLaren, an ROTC graduate from MIT in 1960, who later went on to become a project director with Lockheed Martin Space Systems, from which he retired in 2003. This section of his memo to the FBI was not declassified until 1993. In response, the FBI issued the same response as to all of the other inquiries, with one exception. This time, they identified who it was that examined the stored effects. It was the Office of Scientific Research and Development from MIT, a breeding ground of CIA technical types, the Office of Naval Intelligence, and agents from U.S. Naval Research. What they may have been looking for had likely already been taken, according to a recent PBS special entitled Tesla, Life and Legacy. Nikola Tesla's nephew reported that Tesla's most recent journal was missing from the bulk of material stored by the OAP. In recent years, high-profile projects, such as the High-Altitude Auroral Project, or what we know today as HAARP, the Strategic Defense Initiative, or what has come to be known as Star Wars, and many of the devices promoted by proponents of non-lethal weapons have Tesla's intellectual fingerprints all over them. MKUltra, in terms of mind control and the breaking down of prisoners for military interrogations, the events at Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and in the CIA network of secret prisons dotting the globe, all have their intellectual origin in the work carried out by a network of scientists under the behests of the intelligence community. Beginning in the World War II period, mind control, per se, refers to well-funded, broad-based series of programs designed to explore the furthest reaches of human cognitive ability. The Nazis, as well as the Japanese, had been experimenting on prisoners throughout the war. Recovery of the records of these experiments led the U.S. to proceed with investigations into new means of interrogations and the building of resistance to interrogations of U.S. personnel. The CIA, in association with various other agencies, undertook a long series of experiments on unsuspecting prisoners, students, military, personnel, and others. All these people were recruited. One of the at least 162 sub-projects of what became known as MKUltra. Interest was certainly piqued by the case of Cardinal Minsetsny and the reports of brainwashing techniques used on American soldiers in prisoner of war camps in Korea. But even prior to the Korean War, the resiliency of the human mind was being tested by researchers on the black budget. These black budgets came about, and as Eldrin Bird said, they went black. Two of his projects went black or went dark. And this means no one knows anything about them, not even the president. But it's time that we had some transparency in the United States. We want to know where our money is going. This fiat currency that keeps being printed. Printed, printed, and printed. Some of these projects reportedly at times violated every conceivable notion of human rights and dignity. Frank Olson, a mid-level operative, worked on the development of aerosol delivery of drugs and poisons at Fort Detrick, Maryland. His work, which is still classified, was funded through MKUltra. Olson took a trip to England, where MI6 and the CIA were working together on ways to prevent Allied spies and servicemen from yielding to interrogation. Olson also traveled to Frankfurt, where the two agencies conducted fatal experiments on prisoners of war, subject to Geneva Convention rights, human rights, and others considered to be expendable. Olson had an ethical dilemma with the research, and after voicing his concerns, returned to the United States. Now, his case is well publicized, and you'll remember this is the gentleman whose case was heard like all over the United States. And I think you'll remember it as soon as I start to read it. On November 28, 1953, Olson was in room 1018A of the Hotel Statler in New York. At 2 a.m., Olson fell from the 10th floor window of his room to his death on the sidewalk below. The headline reported his death as an accident or suicide. This report was discredited when, in 1975, another official lie was issued to ease his family's suffering and deflect public scrutiny. This time, Olson was called the victim of an LSD experiment. Media reports cited in the New York Times focused on the sensational aspects of LSD, the use of in psychic warfare, but did not dwell on the more egregious violation of human rights and dignity inherent in the programs. The truth was not revealed until 1994, when his son finally had his body exhumed and examined. The autopsy showed that Olson's left temple had been fractured before he fell. According to the New York Times Magazine, CIA tradecraft books from 1953 that have since been released teach that one of the surest methods of killing without a trace involves impairing their reflexes with alcohol or drugs, and then stepping up behind them and stunning them with a blow to the temple. After that, you quickly grab their ankles and in a single motion flip them over a bridge, balcony, or out of a window, more than 70 feet off the ground. What Olson saw, and what cost him his life and his family their peace of mind for 30 years, was the beginning of a long-term strategy to develop means of making individuals both resistant to brainwashing and to control the actions of individuals. The cover story that was used to justify the beginning of the project was that there was a brainwashing gap with the Koreans. Richard, are you still with me? I bet he isn't. He's there, but he's away from his phone. Okay, experimenters used college students, servicemen, mental patients, the poor, and in several instances, children, as young as 4 years old, in attempts to create untraceable assassins, couriers, and other operatives. MK-Ultra subprojects involved the services of many notable universities and used a number of false front corporations, such as the Foundation for the Study of Human Ecology, and think tanks such as RAND, to shield the source of funding from those with ethical problems. We would still know nothing of these activities had it not been for the release of 16,000 pages of documents in 1977 through the FOIA request filed by the surviving family of Frank Olson. Unfortunately, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of any MK-Ultra records shortly before the order came to his office, leaving an incomplete picture of a concerted effort by various agencies to create new and better means of controlling the thoughts, emotions, and thus behavior of unsuspecting individuals. MK-Ultra was, however, neither the first nor the last project funded by the government or industry to experiment on people in the name of some greater good. A quick review of the history of secret experimentation and medical atrocities reveals a pattern of deadly behavior. The Tuskegee Experiments in 1932 cruelly condemned scores of black men to death from syphilis. The Pellagra incident, in which millions died over 2 decades, in spite of the fact that the United States Public Health Service knew at the time that these deaths were caused by little more than a niacin deficiency. In 1940, scientists exposed 400 prisoners in Chicago with malaria. A U.S. experiment Nazis cited at the Nuremberg trials to defend their own experimentation. During World War II, Seventh-day Adventists, conscientious objectors, were enlisted into Operation White Coat by the U.S. Army and the Adventist Church. They were told that they were being tested for defensive research purposes, while the government was in fact testing offensive chemical and biological weapons. After World War II, matters became far worse for those who were caught up in the web of illegal scientific testing. In 1947, Colonel E. Kirkpatrick of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission issued a secret document stating that the agency would begin administering intravenous doses of radioactive substances to human subjects. Okay, thank you, folks, and God bless. Bye.